Hello, Year 6. I am going to be reading to you a little bit more of Fly Me Home. Now, each class was at a different point, but I'm just going to go from where my class was up to, and you can listen to it again, or you can wait until we're at the bit that your class was at. But I'm going to be starting from chapter 17, when Lilu speaks to Dad again. So, it was so real, Dad said. I really thought I was there with you. Dad had told me that there'd been nothing wrong after we had last spoke, just that his phone had cut out. He said I must have imagined him calling for help. Everything was back to normal. Well, as long as it could be when he was so far away from us. He was describing a dream he'd had to me. He used to do that in the old days at home, only back then it would be over the breakfast table, and he'd be right in front of us, brandishing a spoon and a wide grin. You were wearing grey trousers and had a plastic bag with your lunch in it, and Tiber was there too. He was standing next to you. I was with the other parents, standing right by you. Maybe it wasn't a dream, Dad, I said. What's that, my love? You're breaking up a bit. I said, maybe you really were there. Well, it certainly felt like I was. It was very nice to see you and Tiber, even just in dreamland. I remembered wishing for Dad to be there with me as I held the conker in my hand on the playground. He was laughing with the other parents. I'd heard the sound of his chuckle, and then the whistle went and he had vanished. Were you laughing in the dream? I asked. Well, now that you mention it, I was. How did you know? Because you're always laughing, Dad, I told him. He began to chuckle. I'd missed that sound. I felt my heart grow bigger just hearing it. Now tell me, Lilu, how's school going? Are you doing okay? Dad always asked questions I didn't want him to ask. I knew that if Mum asked me something, I could distract her. But not Dad. He would always sense if you were avoiding the question. I was saved by Tiber coming in and demanding to speak to Dad. I didn't want to tell him that things hadn't got any better at school, but I knew that if Tiber hadn't come along, I'd end up admitting it. Dad always had a way of extracting the truth of how you felt. At school, I was trying very hard to do the right thing, but it was difficult when I wasn't sure what that was exactly. Why don't you speak? One of the girls in my class said to me one day. She was called Terry. I opened my mouth to answer, but then I realised that I didn't know what to say, so I closed it again. She never speaks, says Aisha, who wore her hair scraped back from her face in a high dramatic ponytail. She looked thoughtful. I'm not sure if she knows how. Oh, said Terry. She frowned at first, but then she nodded as though she'd understood something and walked away from me. For some reason, I couldn't blurt out that at my old school I taught all the time, that I'd once even got in trouble for chatting too much. Dad had given me one of his talks about not distracting other people from their work. Despite what Tiber had told me on my first day, I didn't make friends at school. For him, it was a different story. He spent most of his time on the mobile, not trying to ring Dad, but sending messages to his new friends. I gave up trying to talk to him because he was always bent over the small screen, his fingers tapping the buttons, only responsive to its beeps and vibrations. He hadn't left at night again, but sometimes he came back well after school had finished. He'd say something like, homework club was on, or there was an after-school talk, but from the way he tilted his head to the side and the bright gleam in his eyes, I was pretty sure he was lying. But Mum never questioned him, and I wondered if I'd got it wrong. He did seem a little more distant on those days, though. His eyes were never still. They didn't settle on anything. And he seemed more agitated, like the house wasn't big enough for him anymore. Sometimes he smelled of smoke, like car exhausts, and I noticed that he always took a shower when he came in. But I didn't think about it too much, really. I had my own worries. At school, I was more and more alone. Whenever one of the other children smiled at me or asked me something, Terry or Aisha or one of the other girls would quickly explain that I didn't speak, that I didn't know how, that they shouldn't be bothered talking to me. I was left well alone, because who wanted to speak to someone who wouldn't talk back? I grew quieter and quieter until one day I realised that I hadn't spoken at school at all, apart from saying yes, miss, almost silently to the register in the morning. Mrs. Winters never pushed me to say it louder, and for that I was grateful. going to leave it there for today. So come back tomorrow and there will be another little section from Fly Me Home.